So generally the reason I originally started this and I was doing a lot of interviews with like economists and stuff like that, to really get a better idea for the macro. But I feel like the news is kind of telling the macroeconomic story again, a little bit better. And so I wanted to change it up a little bit and get a better local market perspective. And that's why I've been talking to a lot of realtors. And then my mom and I are going to do some stuff where we're talking to a lot of local business people as well, just to get an understanding for how different local markets are functioning and adapting to the challenges that COVID have brought forward, and then also how different small businesses are doing the same. So if it's cool with you, if I would imagine most of the people watching this are going to be from your following, but for those who don't know, if you could just give a brief introduction and then we can kind of spiral out of control from there.
Yeah, so my name is James Milonas, but everyone calls me James in the City. I am the founder and CEO of James in the City, which is a lifestyle and real estate brand here in Toronto. People are always confused what the word lifestyle means, but it is literally everything life and style. So I do all things from eating, sleeping, breathing, living, playing in Toronto. This is my city, my town, and my kingdom.
Nice.
It's not really obnoxious, but I kind of like it.
I like that too, actually. It's like almost like a Disney villain or something.
Hey, I love that. Call me Maleficent.
There you go. On that note, I guess, if you could generally summarize sort of what's going on in Toronto and how the market's changed sort of from the beginning of this year, because I know we were kind of seeing peak price on the condo side and peak rents for sure, in like your sort of February before COVID, and how things kind of changed since then.
Yeah, it's like if I could look at our screen and have it divided right in the middle, that's literally my market right now. We have on the left the condos, which right now are, unless you have money to buy, the condos are like, it's a stupid situation right now because you can't get rid of a condo unless they're like over 1,000 square feet or done to the nines, or a beautiful view or a massive terrace. But the average two bed, two bath condo, you can't give it away at this price. At this point, prices have dropped so much.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't say, hold on, they haven't dropped. That's the wrong answer. They are now selling to what they should be selling. So we're not seeing multiple offers anymore on condos.
Right. Yeah, they're less inflated, I would say. And then I think like the challenge is there's so much supply, right? So buyers have a lot of opportunity to shop. And then you described like bigger units and things that are really well upgraded are doing better. Is that sort of just more luxury product, you would say? Like,
I wouldn't even say luxury. I would just say size. Because if you think about someone who's in a rental condo, or a small box or a one bedroom, they need more space because they're now working from home. So they want that two bedroom, but they also have a spouse that works from home.
Right.
So the 700 square foot two bedrooms are not cutting it. So now we're looking at 900 square feet, 1,000 square feet, 1,200 square feet. And that's what people are migrating to, with a balcony or a terrace. Because let's be real, we want to spend as much time as we can outdoors because we were robbed of that for so long this year.
Right. When you look at luxury product, like, do you find, because I've noticed that in the data, luxury seems to be a little bit more resilient by comparison to some of your entry level stuff. Like on the condo side, I think the only stuff where price is really starting to drop aggressively would sort of be your old Airbnb ghost hotels, old student rentals, like your almost hotel size units.
Yeah.
Because there's just like, if there's no, if there's 80,000 students missing from the city, that's a big piece. And then if, nobody's really Airbnb-ing in Toronto because there's no incentive to go down there to go visit bars, restaurants, culture, et cetera. I mean, when you look at the bottom end of the market, is it telling a different story than the top end? And then I guess the follow-up question to that would be, do you see luxury product as sort of like your smart money indicator on those are people who maybe know more about the market than us, especially with foreign capital?
Yeah.
And,
so
are they like, is that a leading indicator that recovery might be maybe a better story than we think?
Yeah, so there's like, I think 5,500 units on the market right now, from Scarborough to Etobicoke, North York to the Lake. So basically all 6 boroughs of the city, which is a lot. But again, you're right. It's all those ghost hotels. It's Airbnbs, it's student rentals, it's rental properties, because tenants are now saying, fuck it, I don't have to, be downtown for work. I can go live in Oshawa, I can go live in Keswick, I can go live in Barrie, where I can get a house with a backyard and, nature trails and whatever else, versus having to be, right beside the hotspot for brunch, which is closed.
Right.
Luxury product always seems to be resilient no matter what city you're in. You'll see a little bit of a drop here and there in some of like the major trading cities like New York, But in a city like Toronto, it's so resilient because we're a little more well managed with our money,
Right.
right? If you look at the sales that happened over the course of the peak of COVID, Rosedale, Moore Park, Deer Park, Summerhill, South Hill, Forest Hill, numbers remain really strong. Price points remain really high. But well, who was really hit the hardest was, I want to say it, and not to pinpoint a neighborhood specifically, but to pinpoint a demographic of a client would be those living in the Avenue and Lawrence area who have moved in the last, I want to say, 10 years, because it's that new money mentality, right? You bought a house you can't afford. You and your spouse drive, a Range Rover or, the equivalency of a G-Wagon, where you're $150,000 per car.
Yeah.
Plus you got a sports car. Plus you got two kids in private school. Plus you got sports to pay for. Plus
Yeah.
you've got, skiing lessons, and you're a member of the Granite Club. Those were the ones who were hit the hardest because they were so over leveraged that
Right.
when COVID came and they were shut down, they might have taken a salary deference. They might have been working from home on reduced hours, right? So they're the ones who were hit the hardest because they're still paying everything out with not as much coming in.
Right.
Those who have been sitting on money longer, who were smarter with their investments, are a little more solid.
Right. Yeah, I think that, I mean, this is where it becomes a challenge, and it seems like the Bank of Canada like really wants to protect owner equity at all costs, right? Because I think that like the story that you just told, and I mean the story that the bank was telling for the past decade or more was, yeah, like you can trust us to make sure that values are going to go up. So lever up and get that money into the economy, and then once that, if equity starts to decline, which I mean naturally based on the amount of supply that we're seeing on the condo and detached side, it looks like there's some negative pressure in some of the urban areas. It's how long or how much risk can we afford in the market if prices slide 2 to 5%? Are people going to be underwater? The reality is probably they shouldn't, right? Because most people shouldn't be levered up to 95% on those homes that you're describing.
I was going to say, there was a study that I read the other day, and I don't remember where I saw it. It might have been Bloomberg, but it was, if you're sitting with at least 10% equity in your home, which 95% of Ontarians are sitting on, just given how hot it's been here,
Yeah.
we'll be fine, right? Like I really haven't had anyone panic to sell or panic to go. I've had a few people who were panic buying because they're like, oh my God, like it's dirt cheap. Let me just snag some real estate.
Right.
But now they can't get a tenant. And I told them, why are you renting it out? Like put your kid in there, right? Move your mom in there, something, because you're not going to get a tenant,
Right.
right? There's like 8,000 units for rent in the city right now. Like who's renting units? No one.
Yeah. And how do you reconcile that with like the behavior of consumers? Like if you work with a lot of condo owners, I imagine, and on the lease and sale side. So what's the breaking point? Like when somebody's cash negative for 2 months, 3 months, I mean, is it when their deferrals run out, they're basically going to have to list this thing for sale and try and move it quickly? And then how resilient are they against price changes? Like if you've got a vacant condo and it's costing you $2,000 a month in mortgage and $500 a month in condo fees, it's a lot of dough to put out over if it's going to take you 3 months to get it absorbed by the market, right?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I just keep telling people, if you can put a friend in there who'll pay you whatever, just get some money to offset the costs.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the lease listings I took this year for condos, I told my clients we're going to have to reduce the price. We should have rented for 3,200. We rented for 26,
Right.
right? Because there were 15 units in the same rise in the same building
Yeah.
that were comparable.
Right.
So you want to beat them out, but this was at the time where people were starting to work from home, and everyone was like, I don't need to be in the city anymore.
Right.
Once the borders open, once immigration comes back, once international students start flocking the city again, you watch, prices will double. I'm telling you, if you can afford to buy right now, get out there and buy something, sit on it. Don't rent it out, just sit on it. Put a friend in there, because tenants are shit. We all know tenants are shit, right? But once the borders open up, I'm telling you, your money will double.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would say like I'm pretty bearish on condos generally as an asset class, but I've actually been kind of hoping to see a buying opportunity for myself over the next little bit for the city, because I've always wanted some exposure to the Toronto market. I didn't always want a condo. Like I'd love to develop something mixed use or whatever, but it's just probably out of reach for me right now.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I have a similar perspective, and I'm not really trying to time the bottom of the market. But I do think that like, if we see like naturally, I think the writing is on the wall that, there's so much oversupply on the rent side. Eventually that's going to make it to the sale side. You're seeing already a ton of inventory coming into the sales, you should see prices come down. So like on the buy side, like if you have condo buyers who were active in February and just getting blown out of the water in bidding wars, they must be having a heyday if they still believe in the product. I guess the question is it changing some people's belief on whether or not they actually want a condo? Or like, I mean, have you had some buyers drop off, or is there new people, kind of like opportunistic buyers jumping in?
Yeah, so there was a few. There was a few that I picked up who, their other brokers couldn't service because they weren't from the city. They couldn't handle, the fast-paced market of prior to August.
Yeah.
And so they let their old brokers go and they hired me to get them a condo. And with the changing market, I was able to snag some really good deals for them. But then I've got a couple buyers who were looking at the condo market that now we're like, you know what, James, like if we're not in bidding wars anymore, I'd rather look at a house, because if I'm going to spend up to $1 million, I'd rather get myself a house with no maintenance fees, or like a puddle, right, with like a
Yeah.
small shared maintenance for garbage and snow
Yeah.
clearing, versus being in a tower with thousands of people.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, right? Like, I guess the question becomes like, and this is where I think there was that trade-off between like the gap between a condo and a house was the smallest it had ever been, right? Like condo values had accelerated so much. And like you had mentioned at the beginning, they were frothy, right? Like you could tell everybody was looking at it and they were like, this is a little bit out of control. Now it seemed to getting a little bit back to a normal level. I guess the question is like, do you think that there's potential for the condo market to pull the detached market, not just in Toronto, but maybe in the GTA, down if condos do slide because they're an entry-level product? Or are they more of an investment now that they like kind of function apart from the detached market?
I think they're just two separate all in all, right? I think you're going to see a massive growth, or continue to see massive growth in the suburbs, right? Like Northumberland has seen incredible growth this year because it's an hour on the go train from Cobourg to downtown Toronto, right? You can get half an acre of land and a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house for the same price as the average condo downtown.
Yeah.
So I think the suburbs are going to grow like crazy. I think the detached market in the city will continue to grow at a reasonable pace. I think the semi-detached market will outpace the detached at some point. Not in terms of dollar, but in terms of actual sales, because that's going to be the new entry level. And I think to a point, condos still will be. But I think we're going to start seeing a lot more people buying pied-à-terres, right? Those who have maybe left the city, moved to your neck of the woods, right? So I got a client who called me the other day and said, listen, James, if I can find, something nice along the lake from, Lake Simcoe up right into Muskoka, get me a pied-à-terre in the city for the 4 times a month I'm in Toronto, and let me live out in, on the lake.
Yeah.
I think we'll see a lot of people moving in that direction.
Right. That's like, I think that like when you examine Toronto, like especially with this world-class city kind of thesis that a lot of people apply to it, that's like really a lot more like your Manhattan, or right. Like, I mean, you see a lot of guys living in, on the Jersey side or whatever, out in the lake house, and they spend their Friday to Monday there, and then they pop into the office on, Monday night until Friday, midday.
Yeah.
And I agree that I think Toronto just hasn't really seen that yet. Like one of the things from an architecture side of things, like if you look at like New York, like, or upstate New York, like there's all of these like beautiful architectural marvels from just money from the city that like you see all of these like really sexy buildings that you don't like, I mean, in Toronto, like in the GTA, like you don't really see that much. Like, and no disrespect to like your King City or Oakville or whatever, but like a lot of this stuff is like really, it's just cookie cutter, like developer, like easy build stuff out in the burbs. And I'm curious to see what the evolution of the suburban market, like, cause this is really the first, if for a guy like me who, like I love the city, but I can really only tolerate it for a period of time. Otherwise it'll like consume me. Like it was just like, I'm not disciplined enough to be there. So I've just been really, really watching to see how this is all taking shape. And I'm very curious, but I would agree. Like I have the same perspective. That's if I'm going to pick something up in the city, it's what you just described, right? And it would be somewhere that I could visit when I'm down working with the finance guys for 3 days a week or whatever it is, right? Kind of a hotel room thing.
And I think there's a huge opportunity right now for both landlords and condo sellers alike. 2016 to 2019, even early 2020, landlords didn't have to do much of their condos to get a tenant in there. They just really had to put it up on the MLS, and tenants were they're winning multiple offers, right? But we're seeing these units that have been so battered over the years, faucets that leak, walls that are dirty, take 20 grand, update your unit, fix your kitchen, fix your bathroom, change your floors. Doesn't cost much. There's 700 square feet, right? It's doing these little fixes to bring in a higher tenant, or if you're selling it, throw in some higher end features where someone who wants it in the condo market doesn't want a condo from 1997.
Right.
It's a little more attractive to them.
Right. Yeah, no, I would agree with you. And I think that like that's, especially if you're going to be like, let's assume that, your days on market for a condo right now is 3 months anyway, right? It's like, okay, like, renovate it and maybe it'll save you a little bit of time. And like, I think CapEx is important in a time like this, right? Because you got to stand out. Like if I go through, like 28 Wellesley, which I was through like with a buddy of mine the other week, like it's a ghost town in there because it's a lot of students, right? And those are all basically hotel rooms. And every unit is the same. And that homogenous nature of those units is what's going to kill them against if the market does start to slide, right? It's like if nothing differentiates you from the unit up there that just sold for 50 grand below asking, now all of a sudden you're under pressure, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I wanted to ask was around like these local businesses. We chatted a little bit about it there, but like you're seeing a lot of closures. Queen West, I think there's like 70 vacant buildings now.
Right.
I honestly, my perspective on the matter is that we're going to see a lot of new businesses start that weren't viable when rents were so high. Because like eventually you're going to see the same downward pressure on rental rates in an area like Queen West or whatever it is. Like, and you can talk about your trade areas as well if you prefer. But do most people, like, is it starting to impact whether or not they want a condo in a densely populated retail area or commercial area? And it would be the same thing for the office too, right? Like, do people care less about proximity to the core? Do people care less about proximity to the restaurants because there's uncertainty attached to that? Or
I think it's a bit of a mix for everything. Some of the last deals that I've done this year have been, I just want to be close to the subway line. Like, I don't care if it's line 2 from east or west or line 1 north or south, right? They just want to be close to the subway to get downtown to a restaurant. Personally, a lot of my people want to be walking distance. Like my core group of people want to be walking distance to things. A neighborhood like Queen West, yeah, will we see it hit hard? Absolutely. Rents were so high, and the amount of businesses that were there there's so much of the same, right? You can walk down Queen West in the fashion district and see 6 different fabric shops or 5 different vintage stores.
Right.
Nothing's different, right? So of course, the ones that don't have a big following are not going to survive. I think the city's a really weird city because every neighborhood is like a little community. Right. So you got like Beaches, Queen West, Little Portugal, Yorkville, Center Core, the Lake. And it's almost like living in, Barrie, Muskoka, Keswick, where you have your local restaurants that you go to and everyone kind of knows your name. And Cabbagetown is that prime example where you can walk down Parliament and hit every single shop and everybody knows who you are because you're just supporting local.
Yeah.
Right. It's kind of hard in the city to support local because we have so many big brands like Harbor 60 and and even in terms of retail, we have like the Bay and Renfrew and Saks and Nordstrom's. Some of the small brands kind of often get overlooked. Right. COVID has brought them back to the forefront where we're seeing a lot more people shopping local, even online, shopping those local brands that maybe don't have storefront or don't have brick and mortar. But in terms of restaurants, I think there's huge opportunity here for new businesses to grow. We're going to see a lot more patio space and we're going to see less crowds because restaurants before, they were so overcrowded that no one was really enjoying it. I don't want to sit at dinner with Scott and hear the person next door or the person next table talk about their pregnancy test. I don't want to hear that. I'm sorry. I just want to enjoy my overpriced steak and my overpriced wine.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense too. Like, I mean, I didn't really think about it from that perspective. Like I had always just thought, okay, like if you want to run a business that makes like, chopped salads or something, but it doesn't make sense if you're paying like, 150 grand a year on Queen West. And now all of a sudden, if you can get something for, half that, 75 or whatever, maybe this business is enticed to enter the market now. But that's a good point as well, right? The scale of it. It's like, okay, now all of a sudden you can run a restaurant and you don't have to have people 2 feet away from each other because, well, first of all, social distancing is likely here to stay for the foreseeable future, even if it's cyclical in nature. But then the other piece is, if your rent declines, now all of a sudden you don't need a 350 seat restaurant with 2 turnovers or 3 turnovers. You can get, you can make ends meet with a smaller staff, a cheaper unit, and 200 seats, and it's a much better dining experience. Because I think that like all restaurants in Toronto kind of like and probably out of necessity, ended up with that kind of like douche culture, like very like clubby, and they just packed people in because they had to, right?
Well, it was the whole King West thing. This is where I got pissed with, the city's force of another stage two. I'm like, what the fuck are we keeping bars open? Right?
Right.
That's where the spreads are coming from. King West bars and clubs.
Right.
Those should have been the ones to close, not the rest of the restaurants, because those
Yeah.
weren't the issue.
Yeah. No, I
Right.
know. And I agree with you. Like, and I think that, well, the challenge is like everything was fine in Ontario when we could go out on patios and they were shutting the streets down, and that looked really good for urbanization. Like you could look at that and say, wow, like this is actually like a beautiful way. Like I remember just walking downtown and I was like, man, Jane Jacobs would just love this, right?
Mhm.
That Toronto's like almost European in the sense that like you have these patios spilling out into the street and whatever, but it's not, I mean, I guess we're not European enough in nature that we're like in Scandinavia where everybody throws a Canada Goose on and sits on a patio in the middle of the winter, right? So
I think that's what's going to happen this year, though.
yeah, I would agree. Honestly, I really think so, and I think that's cool. Like, I think that that's something that is would be a welcome introduction to our city from my perspective. Like, I think I saw they were opening, I guess at Cabana, they're doing like a big outdoor winter heated patio, right? 5,200
Yeah.
square feet or something.
See, and this is I'm gonna get right through the coals for saying this. As much as I love some of these initiatives and incentives that people are doing for their restaurants, their patios, what pisses me off, and again, I'm gonna get right for saying it, is the amount of 905ers or 519ers that are flocking the city
Yeah,
to sit on our patios, but then they bitch and complain when we do it to them.
I know.
Right? Like,
It is funny, I don't even think you'll get raked for saying that. Like, I think that it is really funny because like as soon as Toronto goes phase 2, it's like, oh, here we go. Like everybody's going to come up here and then we're going to be in phase 2. Like York Region will be in phase 2 in a week. And they weren't wrong, but it was like, yeah, Toronto was in phase 2 because all of you guys were going down there and it's true. Right. And this is where like the social aspect of it becomes a challenge. And I'm glad that I'm not the policymaker that has to be involved with these decisions. Right.
hmm.
Um,
Yeah, interesting times, but I kind of like the smaller restaurants. I love Chicago. It's my favorite
yeah.
city.
Yeah.
And there are a few small scratch restaurants where when the kitchen's done, it's done. Like there is no more food.
Yeah.
Right? They have X number of menus prepared. It's a new menu once a week kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you're going to see a lot of small businesses in Toronto go that, like small restaurants where you're not going to go in for that standard pub fare. You're going to have limited, this is what this week's menu is. You like it, great. You don't, you don't. And it's 20 tables. I'm all for that.
I would agree with that because, like, I think and Montreal is very much like that too, right? It's like you go in and, like, they're making what they're making and they don't have this massive menu because they have like, like, if you go to a restaurant in Montreal, like, the staff is quite a bit smaller than here. The sizes are, and it's the same thing. And, like, they're not in a hurry to push you out of the door, right? Like, I think that I'm actually interested, and I don't know enough about the restaurant scene in Toronto, but I like, if I were to just generally say based on my experience going to restaurants in Toronto, I think we were probably due for a change to kind of eliminate some of that like douche culture that you would hear like Anthony Bourdain talk about in a city like New York or, I mean, Miami would be probably the capital for it.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see what happens with all these vacant units. Like for me, it would be more, I'm almost like bullish on Toronto becoming a more normal city, like, or a more, like, I think we have a really good opportunity now to have new innovative businesses that didn't stand a chance when they were competing with like these massive tenants that were coming in from these other world-class cities to participate in Toronto. How are you going to compete with like a Nobu or whatever in the city for a central location? And now all of a sudden you've got a ton of vacant units. I would say that I think that Toronto's restaurant, like, you give it'll take time, but you give it 5-10 years and I think it'll be better than ever, right? That's my perspective on that.
Yeah, I think once I mean, I have all these words in my head that I'm going to get like screamed at for saying, but like once some of the slum goes away,
Yeah,
and we can clean up some of like that stretch of Yonge Street from, Bloor to College Park is changing, but it's not changing fast enough because it's so dumpy. But once that changes up, there's going to be small, independent little storefronts underneath condos that are going to come in where you can get those small, great independent kitchens who could compete with Nobu, or a small steakhouse that could compete with Highs or
right.
Harbor 60,
Right.
right? Because again, you're going to have smaller kitchens, smaller staff, smaller seating, and they're going to do well. It's going to become a destination.
Yeah.
Versus like that douche culture on King West where the guys come in with the jeans and the t-shirt and the chains, but they don't got a pot to piss in.
Yeah, for sure. No, I would agree, honestly. And I think like the high volume nature of that King West model is what makes it like so difficult to, like, you have to have, like, it's quality over quantity, right? It's like, okay, do I want to get enough people in here that I can make money, or do I want to do a really good job? And people never were able to make that trade-off because you couldn't make enough money off of a small group of people, right? Unless you're like one of those kind of standalone. But even like the big floor plate restaurants, like notable restaurants, notable, like, I don't know, like sort of your like locally famous restaurants, like a lot of them are running huge floor plates. Like that's not cheap, right?
Yeah.
What do you, when you think about like that, if you were to remove sort of like the work piece, so like whether or not proximity to the office matters, or if people are going to be doing 3-day work weeks to the financial district or whatever it is, and then kind of the same thing, only patronizing businesses during those 3 days. Is there another element that like is still keeping people in like the core, which is like, and I'm curious because I don't know, like I think I'm removed from that because I have a family up here in the burbs, but that like the social aspect, like, do you think that that's powerful enough to keep people moving to the city while there's like this 2-year to 5-year kind of question mark of what is going to happen?
Yeah, I think it's like anything. It's it's a city of opportunities. Right. So people are going to want to stay in the city because they can open a new business, or the kind of business that they want to have, or the kind of business they work in just isn't suitable in the suburbs.
Right.
Or they want to be in a location where they can walk to Dundas Square. I don't know why you would want to, but to walk to Dundas Square. Or, you want to be able to pick up your paddleboard and walk down to Cherry Beach.
Right.
Without having to get into a car. So there's going to be a huge flock of people coming back to the city to be in those neighborhoods where you can't get that style of life anywhere else.
Right.
But like I get living in the suburbs. Like I grew up in Richmond Hill, right? I grew up in South Richmond, where our old office used to be. There was nothing there. Like if I was living there now during a pandemic, 30 years old, I'm not like almost 30 years old, like I would go nuts. Wouldn't go to Hillcrest Mall.
Yeah.
Like, go hang out.
That's what you used to do, right? I was the same. Yeah, you would like go mall ratting or whatever, right?
Like I did that when I was yeah. But at least like now downtown, I can get out. I can throw on some sneaks. I can walk down to the lake, grab a coffee, browse through Kensington, pop into that stuff for the day. And I think that's what people love. It's just that pedestrian lifestyle.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, my video paused for you here, so it might mess up the recording a bit. I'm just going to switch over to speaker view.
Did we lose you, Dan?
Can you hear me? Yeah, I guess the only other piece remaining that I wanted to discuss, unless there's anything that you want to add, was just what are, from just a general market perspective, like biggest risks and then biggest opportunities that you're seeing in your trade areas or in Toronto in general right now as a result of sort of the COVID happening and then also moving forward from the future?
I think biggest risk would just be those small kind of micro condos where I don't think anyone's going to want to be in. Maybe students because they're never in their rooms, but as investments, I don't think they're going to be, unless you're buying it as a pied a terre, I don't think they're going to be worthwhile investment.
Right.
Biggest opportunity, definitely renovate your space.
Right. And would you be encouraging people to purchase to renovate as well? Like, is that something that you would add to that discussion, or is it too early for that? Did you lose me again?
Sorry, Dan, my speaker just, yeah, can you go again?
Yeah, I was just curious if you're also including, oh, you dropped off there.
No.
Oh, you're here?
No, I'm still here. I just turned my video off. You can hear you better.
Yeah, I guess the question was whether or not
can you just repeat that question? Sorry.
Yeah. If you're including that in that discussion, like people purchasing units to renovate, or if it's still too early for that.
I would definitely say, yeah, there is some opportunity to purchase to renovate, because there are, and the amount of people who are desperate to sell are very minuscule, but there are people who do need to sell. So there are some opportunities. But I've turned out a lot of listing appointments this year where I've said, now's not the right time for you. I'll assess your condo. I'll give you a plan. This is what you need to do, but I'm not doing anything until after the election. So I would just sit on it for the time being. But there is opportunity for someone to get in there and snag some of these older units that have been investor units or are in buildings that are 10 plus years of age, where you could throw in 20, 30,000 and add on another 80 in equity.
Right. Makes sense. Is there anything that you wanted to discuss or add to the discussion that I didn't touch on that you think is important for people to know about either Toronto or the GTA or whatever's going on, like things that you're seeing in the market right now?
No, honestly, I think we covered it all.
Okay, good. Well, I really appreciate your time then. I'll let you get back to your, what I'm sure is going to be a very busy day. And I'll make sure to share this all on social. So I usually post the video to YouTube, and then I do a podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I just started doing like screen recording, so hopefully I'll be able to do like an Instagram Reels and IGTV video that we can share. If people want to reach out to you, if they're interested in purchasing a condo in the city, or they want to talk about renovating and want to get your design perspective on how they can maximize, where would you prefer that they reach out to you?
Yeah, the easiest place to get a hold of me is on Instagram, and it's at the James in the City.
Okay, perfect. I'll put that in the show notes as well. And then hopefully we can get a nice conversation going on social media following this up.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Dan.
Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it, James.
Hey, buddy. Ciao.